Alright, so welcome back. One of the newest features in Exercise 7's implementation of Mental Rate 3.6 is a new mode with Final Gathering called Exact Mode. So we're going to go ahead and explore that right now. Let's open up an example scene here to better illustrate this. And the scene we're looking for is called FG for Final Gather, Exact Mode Start. So let's open up that scene. And here we are. Go ahead and click on the first camera record icon there, camera memory icon, and this is what we have here. If I go ahead and do a preview render, you can see here what I'm getting is a render with no indirect illumination. This is just a render with the portal lights outside the windows and everything has a white material shader applied to it, so it's nothing too special. So let's go ahead and close that, and let's go over here to render. Go to renderer options. Okay, so if we go over here to Final Gathering and we enable it, these are default options. We're set to multi-frame mode, 100 rays, 15 points are going to be interpolated, so on and so forth. Okay, now if we go over here to the accuracy modes, we have multi-frame, automatic, expert, and legacy. Then down here we have this new mode called exact. This is the newest mode in Exercise 7. Now what does exact mode mean? Well, if we go to something like multi-frame mode, we can see that we have a number of rays parameter, a number of points to interpolate, and a max radius. Same thing if we go to automatic, we get those settings except of course for the max radius. If we go to expert, we get a minimum and maximum radius. And if we go to exact mode, what we're going to end up with seeing here is just one setting for controlling the quality, and that's the number of rays, which is by default set to 100. So to better illustrate this, I'm going to switch back to automatic mode, and I'm going to go ahead and use just 32 rays, so a very small amount of rays, and I'm going to leave the point interpolation at 15. The way that automatic mode and pretty much all these modes work, except for the new exact mode, is they interpolate Final Gather. Final Gather is calculated, it's computed, and then basically Mental Rate takes all those Final Gather points, and based on certain parameters, it's going to go ahead and interpolate them to create a faster Final Gather effect. Okay, and if I do a render region now, we'll be able to see that. Okay, so here's our render using the automatic accuracy mode, using only 32 rays, and it's interpolating 15 points. Alright, so it doesn't look that great. We're using a very small amount of rays. Let me lock that render down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to exact mode, and I'm going to render out the same amount of rays, only 32. Okay, so I finished rendering here. Let's put these side by side and see what the differences are. Okay, let me lock down this new image. The one on the left is using automatic mode, which uses interpolation with 32 rays. The image on the right is only using 32 rays in the new exact mode in Exercise 7. Okay, so what's the major difference here? The first difference that you probably noticed is that the image on the right, the one using exact mode, rendered out a lot faster than the image on the left, which is interpolating points. Now, the general rule is that point interpolation with Final Gathering makes the Final Gathering render out faster. So why did it render out slower in this case? Well, the reason is that we're using a very small amount of rays. We're only using 32 rays. So the exact mode doesn't pre-calculate, it doesn't interpolate, doesn't do anything aside from just shoot out 32 rays and that's it. It does its job and then it goes home, so to speak. The image on the left is using point interpolation. So what happens is that these 32 rays are being interpolated by Mental Rate, which means that there's a little bit more overhead in the calculation time. But that's only evident when we're using a small amount of rays. Once we increase the amount of rays, say to 256 or higher, then you're going to notice that the image on the left, the one with interpolation, is going to render out a lot faster than the image on the right. Why does that happen? That's because exact mode doesn't interpolate, it doesn't use any tricks up its sleeve, it doesn't cheat, it doesn't round corners, anything like that. What it does is basically just sticks to shooting out the amount of rays that you specify. So it's like using a brute force mode where you specify 32 rays and that's what it does. It doesn't do anything besides that. The image on the left, however, is taking those 32 rays and then it's interpolating them based on a certain distance and a number of points that we chose to interpolate, which was 15 points. If we go over here to our automatic mode settings, you can see that's how many points we chose to interpolate, 15. So let's go back to exact mode over here. So what you'll also notice is that the image on the left has a little bit less blotching than the image on the right. And that happens because the image on the left is interpolating points. So it's trying to smooth out the small amount of rays that it has, which is only 32, which is not enough for a production render. It's only good for doing a preview render and seeing how this is looking. But if you look very closely, look at this in a lot of detail. For example, this spot right here looks a lot smoother on the image on the left than it does on the image on the right. So with exact mode, you don't get this nice smoothing effect that you would get over here with using automatic mode or any of the other modes that use point interpolation. And that's because the exact mode, again, doesn't interpolate any points. So what is the benefit to using exact mode? The benefit to using exact mode is that you get a much more physically accurate result. Because there's no cheating, because there's no interpolation, because there's no cutting corners, you get yourself essentially what the name suggests, an exact mode or an exact result of final gather calculations. So you get yourself a much more physically accurate and more realistic lighting than you would using any of the other modes that interpolate the values and cut corners and use a little bit of cheats to try to render out faster. So if exact mode is great because it renders out more realistically and more physically accurately, what are the drawbacks to using exact mode? Well, because exact mode doesn't cheat or cut any corners or use interpolation, it takes much longer to render. So if we were to render out the image on the left with automatic mode, and let's go ahead and do that. Let's take automatic mode and let's go ahead and make that 256 rays. I'm also going to go to diagnostics and I'm going to turn on information in progress here so we can go back and see just how long these renders took. I'm going to take automatic mode and I'm going to render with 256 rays, which is a very fair amount, very good amount of rays. And I'm going to take the image on the left and I'm going to go ahead and refresh it. Actually, before I refresh it, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go down here to overwrite existing file and I'm going to turn on append new final gather points to file, because that's another way that that these other modes like automatic mode can take advantage of point interpolation to render out even faster than exact mode. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have automatic mode use all the weapons in its arsenal to pretty much beat up and defeat the exact mode here. So we're going to stick with append new final gather points to file. So let me go ahead and refresh this. Okay, so the render here finished, and if I go over here and open up the script editor, clicking on a little scroll icon there, you'll see that the wall clock is about 2 minutes and 2 seconds for this specific render right here. So I'll go ahead and close that. And the reason it's showing me that information is because I went to diagnostics earlier, if you remember, and turned on information progress. So it's very important to do that, or else you won't get the wall clock there telling you how long the render took. Okay, so let's take the image on the right. And that's the render that we're going to go ahead and render out exact mode with. So let's switch from automatic mode to exact mode. And we're using 256 rays. So it's going to take a substantial amount of time to render this out. So I'll hit refresh. And this is going to take a good while to render out. Man, that was a huge fuck up. Editor, edit this out of the video, edit this out of the video, and there's a problem there. Going back over here to automatic mode. Okay. Starting again in 3, 2, 1. So what we'll do is we'll take the image on the right and we're going to use that to render out the exact mode to compare and contrast here. One thing you want to do, however, is make sure you switch the append new final gather points to file back to overwrite existing file. And I'll switch from automatic mode to exact mode. Now let's hit refresh over here and see what we get. Okay, so it finished rendering. Let's go ahead and look at the wall clock here in the script editor. We can see now the render took 3 minutes and a half, just about 3.5 minutes, as opposed to 2 minutes in the previous render. So using the same amount of rays, only 256, which is a pretty good amount, pretty fair amount, we were able to use the automatic mode, which interpolates the final gather, to render out about 1.5 minutes faster than the exact mode. So exact mode is pretty good. There's really no settings to tweak. I mean, if you go to automatic mode, you have to know how to work with the point interpolation. If you go to something like multi-frame, you have to understand how to use the max radius. Same thing if you go to expert mode. Now you got to know how to use the minimum and the maximum radius, as well as the number of rays. With exact mode, it's very easy to set up because all you do is set up the number of rays. But if you want to get yourself a really good render using exact mode, you're going to have to use a lot of rays, a lot more than 256. Something over 512 is going to probably give you a very satisfactory, very good render. But that means it's going to take a very long time to render. It's going to take forever to render. While using interpolation allows you to cheat and cut corners and interpolate these points and render a little bit faster. Another thing that you'll notice is, let me just close these two windows down. When you're in automatic mode or any of these other modes that use interpolation, you get a map file where you can save the final gather map to. Save all your final gather points to a map file which can be used later and frozen to render out faster. With exact mode, you don't have access to any type of map file. In other words, when you're in exact mode, final gathering will not be written to any type of file to disk, which means that nothing's interpolated, nothing is pre-cached, anything like that, which is also a drawback because it means if you're going to do a render and you don't want any flickering and things, you're going to have to use a very high number of rays. So again, the benefit to using exact mode is you will get a more accurate render. Your lighting will look a tad better than using any of the other modes. The drawback to it, which is a pretty big one, is the fact that you have to increase this number of rays by a very high amount to get yourself a nice high quality final gather result, which means you're going to be rendering for a very, very long time, which could be a good thing, could give you a chance to go on a very nice coffee break or an extended lunch break, depends on what your boss says. But there you go. So that's the new Final Gather exact mode in XSI 7. Pretty straightforward, very easy to use, but again, it takes a very long time to render, much longer than the point interpolation modes from automatic or expert or multi-frame mode and so on and so forth. So there you go. That's going to do it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.